Okay, I'm going to start with a little bit of video here. Some of you may have seen this before.
Okay, I think the seasons happen because as the Earth travels around the sun, it gets nearer to the sun, which produces warmer weather, and gets farther away, which produces colder weather, and hence the seasons.
How hot it is or how cold it is at any given time of the year has to do with the closeness of the Earth to the sun during the seasonal periods.
The Earth goes around the sun, and it gets hotter when we get closer to the sun, and it gets colder when we get further away from the sun.
These graduates, like many of us...
Okay, anyone seen that before? Yeah. Anyone know which university those students are graduating from? Harvard. This is Harvard University, yeah. I show this by way of making the point that achieving lasting conceptual change is very difficult to do. These are students who've had the best education that money can buy in the US. They're the brightest and best students being taught by the brightest and best, and they're still getting fundamentals like this explained in the way that we just saw. So it's maybe not surprising that members of the public who don't have those kinds of advantages are not necessarily picking up on all the nuances that we're trying to communicate to them by way of climate science. So my name is Dan Bedford. I'm a professor in the geography department at Weber State University. That's in Ogden, Utah, and I'll tell you a little bit more about Weber State in just a moment. And I want to talk today about what do college students think and know about climate change. This is a case study of students at my university, so it's specific to this particular place, but I think there's some broader implications of the results. We've all seen things like this. This is a marvelous piece from the cover of The Spectator, a British publication from 3 years ago. So I don't know why we're here. We should just be outside enjoying the sunshine, but obviously we can all relax. What's troubling about this is the effect it's having on public discourse. For me, I find this very troubling, the widening gap between people of different political outlooks, different worldviews. And we've all seen research along these kinds of lines. This was a summary of some of the Gallup poll results that was published by Riley Dunlap and Erin McCreight a few years ago. And along the same lines, but perhaps even more troubling for me, is research such as this. This is from Larry Hamilton's recent paper, Did the Arctic Ice Recover? And this shows the relationship between education levels and polarization on the issue of climate change. Less education to the left, more education to the right, and up on the y-axis, the extent to which people disagree or agree that climate change is human-caused. And Democrats tend to buy into that more and more as they become more educated, independents somewhat, and Republicans doesn't make a difference. So Dan Kahan also had a paper on this in Nature Climate Change last year, in which a similar finding was discovered and reported, the relationship between general science literacy and greater polarization at greater science literacy levels. So this is a troubling finding for those of us in education. And it made me wonder, is what I'm doing when educating my students, am I just giving them the tools to become ever more entrenched in the positions that they held when they walked in the door? Is that what I'm accomplishing? So I decided to try and find out. My university is in Utah. This is a map that shows voting patterns in the 2008 presidential elections. It's a sliding color scale, so red is more Republican, blue is more Democrat. Utah is here, and Ogden is right there. So we're one of the redder states in the country, and that makes me think that there ought to be a predisposition among my students to be skeptical of climate change. Skepticism, as we've been talking about, is a good thing. Denial, maybe not so much. Weber State University, it's a pretty good gig teaching there, actually. It's a nice place. It's right in the mountains. We've got about 24,000 students. We're an open enrollment institution, so anybody who wants to get an education can come and get an education at Weber State. Many of our students are the first in their families to get a college education. About 24,000 students, many of whom have signed up for vocational programs like nursing and things like that. So that's the place we're at. My methodology for investigating what my students think and know about global warming is, first of all, my Office of Institutional Research was kind enough to put together a random sample of Weber State students. I sent out emails to 3,200 students, got about 600 responses back, of which about 458 were usable. They took an online survey. They were incentivized to take this. The first 20 students got a $10 gift certificate to the Weber State bookstore, and everybody was entered in a drawing to win an iPad mini. So there were certainly good reasons for doing that. And the questions in the survey were drawn from Tony Lazaritz's work, in particular Americans' knowledge of climate change, the 2010 report, Larry Hamilton's 2012 paper in Weather, Climate and Society, and Dan Kahan's paper in Nature Climate Change, both of which I mentioned before. So I wasn't using all the questions from any of those surveys, but I was drawing questions from those surveys, because I think they're very well crafted, and it also facilitates comparison between what my students think and the results from those surveys. So sample characteristics. After I'd done some quality control, I ended up with about 458 usable responses. And political affiliation, we've got Democrats versus Republicans of varying different stripes. Republicans make up about half the sample, maybe a little bit less, and Democrats make up about 20% of the sample. That's in keeping with the demographics of the student body as a whole, so that's a good fit. Focus of study. We've got an emphasis on hard sciences. About 19% of the sample are hard sciences, physics, botany, microbiology, things like that. About 17% in the social sciences, history, geography. About 14% in the arts and humanities. 11.5% in business and economics, and about 18% in health professions. That's the nursing program that I mentioned before. So some other demographics. The single largest group was a group that described themselves as being fairly close to finished with their degree. So they're moving along. That's good. Somewhere in the middle, about 35%, 36%, and just getting started, about 18%. And it's about evenly split between males and females. So I think overall, as a survey, I've got a pretty good representative sample of the Weber State student body. So 458 usable student responses, fairly representative. So what do these 458 students think about climate change? This was a question from the Six Americas survey. Do you think global warming is happening, and how sure are you? I've rephrased it slightly to make it easier to read. It's a longer, more careful phrasing in the original. So do you think global warming is happening, and how sure are you? This is the breakdown. And what we're looking at is only about 19% of the students said no, global warming is not happening. 81% said yes. And about 60% said yes, and they are either extremely sure or very sure that global warming is happening. I was really encouraged by that result. Little comparison with the national level survey. This is comparison with the latest Six Americas report that just came out, reporting from April. And this is the percentage of students or percentage of national respondents who said, yes, global warming is happening, and I'm either extremely sure or very sure. So this is a measure of confidence that global warming is happening or not happening. And the Weber State students are overall a fair bit more confident that global warming is happening relative to the national level. But they're also a fair bit more confident that it isn't happening. So I've got a somewhat more polarized group relative to the national level. Although remember that only about 19% said, no, global warming is not happening. But those who do say global warming is not happening tend to be fairly confident that it isn't. So they're fairly entrenched. Some other indications of what these students think. What would you say most scientists think about global warming? And 55% would say that most scientists think global warming is happening. 2% would say it's not happening. There's a lot of disagreement among scientists. About 36% thought that, and 6% said they don't know enough to say. How does that compare with the national level? Again, the Lazaritz recent publication. And at the national level, the numbers look like this. So my students are more accepting that there is a scientific consensus on climate change. Again, that's good news. I was happy to see that. That's an exciting result for me. What do these students know? So these are just a couple of results with regard to what students think. Let's take a look at what students know. So this is a sense of climate literacy. With regard to the greenhouse effect, these questions were all taken from Larry Hamilton's paper from 2012, by the way. Although there were many other questions that assessed what students know about climate change. These are just the ones that I'm showing today because they're relatively easy to walk you through. Students who could correctly define the greenhouse effect, 91% of the students could correctly define the greenhouse effect. Now, this is on a multiple choice test, which has its own problems. So, they're given a prompt. They have to pick the right answer out of 4 possibilities. But still, 91%, that's That's good. 84% correctly identified that Arctic sea ice had declined in the last 30 years. So the options here, by the way, the correct answer is highlighted in red. With the change in Arctic sea ice, 84% said that Arctic sea ice had declined over the last 30 years. 6% said that it had increased, and 2% said it had, 6% said that it had declined and then recovered. 2% said that it had increased, and 8% didn't know. But still, 84% getting it right. That's reasonably happy about that. 84% got the idea that carbon dioxide had gone up over time. So we've got more carbon dioxide now in the atmosphere than we've had in the past. So 84% were correctly answering that. There's a little caveat here, and as we're going through these results, they become less heartening as we look at the next few. So the change in carbon dioxide, although 84% of students said, yes, carbon dioxide is going up, how it's going up, they weren't so good on. So these are the 5 different options that they were given. How has carbon dioxide in the atmosphere changed over time? They didn't have the word descriptions up here. They just had the graphics. And this is how they answered. The correct answer, of course, is this one, D, and 31% of the students got that one right. But 33% of them said that it's a straight linear increase. So they're getting the idea that carbon dioxide is going up, but they're not getting the sense of just how dramatic that change is. So that's the change in carbon dioxide. Contributions to sea level rise. They were given 4 options. Which do you think is making the biggest contribution to rise in sea level if it melted? And the options were polar land ice, 43% got that one right. 8% said mountain glaciers, and 32% said Arctic sea ice. So not right about that. And finally, what's putting more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere? The 4 options were humans are putting more CO2 into the atmosphere than volcanoes, about the same as 9%. Volcanoes put more CO2 into the atmosphere than humans, 15%, and 21% don't know. So 55% say that humans are putting more CO2 into the atmosphere than volcanoes, which is not really high enough. Overall, though, those sort of population numbers are reasonably inspiring. Right? We've got lots of people saying that carbon dioxide is increasing in the atmosphere. They can correctly identify the greenhouse effect, things like that. So that's positive. Unfortunately, that kind of reflects the wisdom of crowds. That's when you take all of the data and put it together. When you look at individual responses, the news is not quite so good. This is based on 15 different indicators of understanding of climate change. Understanding of the climate system. And only 3% got an A on those. So this is a grading system, 10% scales, and 58% got an F. Compare that with the national level, it's pretty similar. So overall, we can say climate literacy is pretty poor amongst the Weber State University population, as it is amongst the population at large. So how do what these students know relate to what they think? What's the connection between knowledge of the climate system and understanding of climate change, or acceptance of climate change? Again, this is, do you think global warming is happening, and how sure are you? Broken out by political affiliation. And here we can see, this is the extremely sure as shown in the sort of pink color, and strong Democrats going to strong Republicans. And you can see that there's a very clear relationship. People become a lot less sure that global warming is happening as they move towards the right of the political spectrum amongst the students. So that's fitting in with the work of Larry Hamilton, Dan Kahn, and so forth. What would you say most scientists think about global warming? This is the scientific consensus, again by political affiliation, and we see the same thing. These are statistically significant results. That the more towards the right-hand end of the spectrum you are, the less likely you are to say that most scientists think global warming is happening, the more likely you are to say that there's a lot of disagreement among scientists. But let's take a look at some better news. Knowledge grades. So how does understanding the climate system relate to what people think about climate change? When we break this out by knowledge grades, by scores on understanding the climate system, we actually get a much more positive result, much more interesting, much more heartening, encouraging news. Do you think global warming is happening, and how sure are you? This is the extremely sure over here, and there's a clear relationship between knowledge grades on understanding the climate system and how sure you are that global warming is happening. So that is heartening news. The last one, just to finish with, again, what would you say most scientists think about global warming? So acceptance of the scientific consensus. And again, it's clearly related to knowledge grades. The best news of all is that knowledge grades by political affiliation, they're equal opportunity. There are no statistically significant differences in terms of knowledge of the climate system across political affiliation groups. So just to wrap up, overall climate literacy at Weber State University is poor, and that's true also of the population at large. In the absence of information, students are going to use other cues, other guides to decide about global warming, political affiliation being one obvious thing. But when they have information, students will tend to use it. So a couple of quick acknowledgements. Weber State University's Office of Institutional Research made this work possible, and thanks to all the students who completed the survey. And thank you.